Hello, my name's Jake Levy. Today I'm going to tell you about autonomous vehicles and their effects on parking in the near, medium, and long-term future. You might recognize this as being one of the most magical places on Earth, Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. Well, that parking lot doesn't look so magical to me. This is one of the largest parking lots in the United States, and I think you can see from this that, we have a lot of parking. Now, this isn't always filled up, but that's pretty common in the US as well. There's actually almost 1 billion parking spaces and only 250 million cars. That means you've got 4 spaces for every car out there. Now, those cars are on average sitting idle for more than 90% of the day. And the spots that they're sitting idle in are about 8 to 9 feet wide. The average car is only 6.5 feet wide. So we're talking about a lot of unutilized space. Now, if you're in a city and you're actually looking for a place to park, you might spend 20 minutes driving around to find one. That's the average in most major condensed cities. Now, if you look at the total number of accidents that happened in incidents around parking, it's actually 20% of all accidents. Another thing that you have to worry about is getting a parking ticket if you don't park correctly or you don't read the signage. And, there's no rights to a parking spot. It's not whoever sees it first. If you've ever seen this episode of Seinfeld, you know confrontation's very possible and, it can lead to some pretty ugly situations. There are some players trying to disrupt this space. Lux in San Francisco and Valley out in London have actually been offering on-demand valet service where you go into your phone, in their app, you tell them exactly where you're going to be and when, and they'll have someone there to pick up your car. That person will pick up your car, take it back to their corporate location. They'll offer you a variety of services like refueling, cleaning, or other types of maintenance. And then at the click of a button, you can have them bring your car back to you. So this is a great business model in terms of what it offers the customer, but it hasn't proven to be as profitable as they might have hoped. There's some other very interesting ways that people are trying to maximize profits with their effects on traffic congestion. So dynamic meter pricing is essentially the practice of taking in traffic data in order to predict demand. And they then use that to set the price at which people will be willing to leave at least a space or two open at all times. This way, someone who has that high willingness to pay will be able to go and take that spot, and it's assumed that their higher willingness to pay is actually predicated on they have a better utility or more urgent need for that space. Out in Somerville, Massachusetts, there's actually a very interesting project called the Audi Urban Future Initiative. And they're actually starting to design what a parking lot of the future would look like. Now, there's a lot of building regulations around how many parking lots you need for certain sorts of properties, and they're actually predicting that using autonomous vehicle catered parking, they'll be able to reduce the amount of area they need for parking by 60%. So if we're looking at what this industry is going to start to look like in the short term, the next, maybe 5 years, there's going to be a huge shift towards more charging stations. A lot of the vehicles that are going to come out with the autonomous vehicle technology are going to be electric, and so they need charging instead of fuel in order to keep them going. Now, along with some of these short-term changes, you might see more adoption of the dynamic pricing meters, and you'll also see some changes, or at least solidification, of different technologies that will be needed to get this technology to function in a lot of these underground parking facilities. A lot of parking actually is in the basement or and very thick concrete walls, and as you might have noticed, you don't get the best reception. Now, the autonomous vehicle network needs to be able to communicate with one another in order to function properly. And so there definitely needs to be some research into whether or not being below ground in these sort of circumstances will affect the sort of communication that is required. So if we start to look at the medium term, we'll actually be able to see how the Audi Urban Future Initiative is actually capable of reducing their floor space that much. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of parking spaces are on average 8 to 9 feet wide. Well, you can actually start reducing that to 6.5 feet, just the width of the car, when you no longer need to open the doors, when you have computers actually driving these vehicles so that they can ensure that you're not going to get in any accidents. And here's a graphic that kind of shows you exactly how that floor plan will work out. One requirement for this to take place is that you'll need to have pickup and drop-off locations where the actual passengers can get in and out of their vehicles. If this can actually be done properly, it should start to reduce the parking accidents significantly, but you really need to have everyone on board to fully cut out all your parking accidents. So one thing that might be happening in the medium term is the shift towards fleets. Now, people don't really know whether the car manufacturers or companies like Uber and Lyft are just going to start operating all the cars. It's possible that car manufacturers start to only release autonomous vehicles that they are actually directly controlling. And in this way, they can just become an Uber-like service where people can order their car needs on demand. This will actually cause a decrease in the required parking capacity because you're going to have all of these autonomous cars that drive around, basically perform their taxi service, and whenever there's not enough demand for the same number of cars on the road or whenever they need to recharge, they'd simply go back to their company's location where they park, get serviced, cleaned, and that would presumably be somewhere a little more remote where they can get lower prices on the property. So that should also lead to lower regulations for the amount of parking that's needed at certain structures, and that should actually enable some more projects that could be very interesting to get developed in urban centers. Now, if we start to look long term, you'll see no parking in downtown areas. As this happens, you'll see no requirements for parking at new construction. And while this graphic may be a little bit of an exaggeration, I think this will lead to significant green space in urban centers and will be great for the environment and social benefits. As I mentioned before, you're not going to have that sort of confrontation. Congestion from traffic should be significantly down. You basically only need 1/10 or less the number of cars currently on the road for an autonomous vehicle fleet to get through everyone's driving demands. Now, people who do still want to own a private vehicle, they can actually park that at a different remote location, not the corporate quarters for these fleets, but other locations that would still offer charging and cleaning and other maintenance or service requests. Now, some of the things that this would lead to are no more parking tickets because there's actually no more parking on the side of the street. So in this case, you actually have the city of San Francisco that's already started to do this and build these little parklets, these little areas that are in old parking spots on the curbside that actually provide people some public space. And so I think you might just see this, and hopefully some of the value creation, the revenue generation, and the economic growth that can result from this additional space, both from converting these old parking facilities that will no longer be used into new developments, and all this extra space actually on the street. It could make things more walkable, and hopefully that increase in potential tax revenue can offset any loss to the government in parking tickets. One final thing that is interesting is what will happen to actual households when you no longer have cars? Will they still have driveways? Will they still have garages? These things might stick around for a little while, but eventually I think architects will get creative and you'll start to see some very cool new architecture uh, stemming from this new flexibility. Thank you very much for listening, and please feel free to contact me with any comments or questions.